Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me on the Titans of Healthcare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Taylor. We have a very special episode for you today with three amazing guests. And this episode is going to cover the keys to digital health in 2023. And what the main point to really take away from that is a dependable ROI. And we, like I said, we have these three amazing guests. Since we have multiple guests, I'm going to let each person kind of go down, starting with Julian, and tell about their, quick title, company, and feel free to add some background in there too. But really excited for this episode.
Great, Jared. Thanks for having us. David, Ray, nice to be with you. Julian Flannery, I'm the founder and CEO of Summus. We are a virtual specialty care platform. We inform medical decisions across the continuum of care, drive better decisions, and as we'll talk about today, produce a meaningful ROI for our clients.
I'm Ray Deiotte, co-founder and CEO of Monocle Insights, data as a service company focused on impacting better outcomes and better mechanisms and assessment of value in healthcare.
Great. And I'm David Veroff. I'm a managing director in Deloitte's healthcare consulting practice, where I co-lead our population health innovation practice, and also have a long background in the space around measuring the effect and outcomes of digital health and other kinds of care management programs.
Thanks so much. So let's dive in. ROI has always been an important question for every organization when evaluating benefit offerings. Julian, we'll start with you and then we'll go Ray, David. How should organizations be thinking about it right now?
I mean, it's a hugely pertinent question, right? So if you think about what companies and organizations have done over the past, call it 3 to 5, maybe more, David knows better than I, years, they've really sort of accumulated a ton of solutions. There's been billions of dollars invested into, different verticals that produce companies like mine. So there's a lot of solutions out there that companies have bought. And the reality is we're in a different economic climate right now, right? Inflation is up, interest rates are up, labor markets are starting to get strained. There's arguments on whether or not we're in a recession, we're going in a recession, but it certainly is a different buying trend. Healthcare is recession. It's not recession proof, but it is recession resistant. So I think generally the point is they're starting to think, companies are very meaningfully looking at ROI. There's consolidation conversation. There's hard questions about what does this ROI mean? How did you derive it? What does it mean for us based on how we use your product? And those conversations are going on daily with our prospect conversations and even with our existing clients.
Yeah, I think to that end as well, Julian, that as we look at across multiple portions of the healthcare spectrum and look at providers, we look at health tech organizations, and we look at advisories and consultancies, they all are starting to look at how to measure ROI in terms of outcomes, whether that's fiscal outcomes or care level outcomes. And so being able to instrument the data around those processes and those changes is really crucial to help define that ROI. But I think what's missing from what I see and where we need to really lay in a lot of effort is to define early what is the value we're trying to bring to the table, and then how do we measure that, right? Whether it's a fiscal outcome or a clinical outcome, stating that early and then being able to measure through whatever mechanism is available that outcome and that value is really what's going to drive your ROI discussions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And what I think we're all aware of is there are 1,000 great ideas out there, and all these organizations, these little new startups and new early stage companies are doing things that sound very interesting and important. And what is so hard to do is to sort through and figure out what is real and what's not real, and how you leverage actual real world evidence of the benefit of any of these things is where a lot of companies are struggling right now. So the answer is get the real world evidence, focus on what you can see that's plausible as effect, and do the hardcore measurement on ROI.
And we're going to stick with you, David. We're going to go David and Ray for this next kind of prompt. what are some of the, I know you kind of gave us the path, but what are some of the challenges that healthcare companies are experiencing right now in terms of measuring?
Yeah, well, I'm going to focus specifically on ROI as measured by medical cost impact, because that's sort of the most common metric that people care about. Um, the biggest challenge here is really it's a challenge of small numbers and statistics. Healthcare costs are really variable over time and by person. And the only way to manage that variability is to look at large numbers of people being impacted or receiving a treatment or an application of some sort. Um, and what we see is a lot of studies that are produced that have really small numbers, and it just is incredible given the fact that there's so much variation. So the second biggest challenge is really how do you compare? Like what if you're struggling with this, how do you actually define a control group or a comparison group? The gold standard here is a randomized control trial, which is of course very impractical in the real world. um, so, uh, so we go through a lot of machinations to build appropriate comparisons. And of course, the most natural comparison that everybody goes to is look at things over time. So you see a group that you've intervened upon, and you say their behaviors have changed, and their cost profiles have changed, and their utilization of healthcare has changed. And that's a natural one to do, but it's also fraught with challenges um, because there is variation in care and care delivery. If you're targeting your intervention on very high risk people, the law of statistics would tell you it's likely that that group is going to be lower cost in the future. So you can't just look at over time comparisons. And so what we end up doing is spending a lot of energy on trying to build appropriate, reasonable proxies, pseudo controls that are out there or seeking natural experiments. So that all sounds hard. It is actually hard, complex statistically, and require a lot of expertise about how to execute fairly. And actually, for observers like us at Deloitte, really assessing the validity of all these studies is a big challenge as well. So,
David, I couldn't agree more. I think at the end of the day, it boils down to a lack of data, or what we like to call an information asymmetry, right? A lot of these organizations don't have the visibility that they need into the data that they can actually do a good, fair assessment of value or of ROI, right? We talk about small clinical trials, you talk about small numbers. Honestly, sometimes when you start looking at the provider space, they can't see market level movements. They can't see the entire journey of their patient. They can't see all of these things. And in the health tech space, data is so disparate in this space that it's hard to pull all those things together to really say we are doing a good job of value of determining our value and providing our ROI, because we simply don't have the data, but we need access to more and more and more data and information. So I think that really is the biggest challenge, is that information asymmetry and the inability to see an entire market or an entire situation or an entire journey of a patient from multiple perspectives. And without that, it's really difficult to judge value and judge ROI. And so you have to get into the machinations that David just discussed about doing statistical analysis and understanding uncertainty and all of these other things that are really band-aids on a larger problem, which is that lack of knowledge and lack of insight.
And Julian, I want to kick it over to you, because your company has recently launched this new ROI methodology. What is that? Can you give us more of a background beyond that, since this is the core topic here?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting to listen to David and Ray, and we're happy to be partnered with Ray and Monocle. They have a terrific database. They've been terrific partners in terms of providing the data that we measure our ROI against. So, we have one thing going for us. One is, well, we have multiple things going for us, but the first is we focus in specialty care. And if you look at the data, David can attest to this. I think specialty care, specialty pharma is really where a ton of cost is, right? And so we have the benefit of not being a wellness offering or somewhere it's very hard to pinpoint the impact you have. Number two, we set out to design something that was a sort of aligned with our business model, which is, and we wanted to make it very honest and reliable, right? And so David mentioned this concept of trend, over time. We feel trend, there's all the challenges that David mentioned, but there's also, if you have 40 solutions as a large company, how do you know who's impacting what? Right. And so, for us, we said, hey, let's look at the episode, right? The journey. So a member comes to us with any health question, could be allergies for their kids, could be, cancer. And, what we're doing is we're providing that, accelerated access to a high quality specialist who's going to help them understand what they need to do in healthcare, make better decisions. Ultimately, what we do is help people make better decisions, which drives better outcomes and ultimately drives cost avoidance. So we're going to measure the episode, right? So we're going to look at, the decisions that came out of that episode. And then the magic really happens when we compare it against the data that comes out of Ray's company, where we take a cohort from a database of 340 million patient lives. And we make that look like the patient demographically, geographically, and whatnot. And so we compare kind of the decisions that patient made and the track that they're on versus the cohort. And we look at stuff like avoided surgeries. That's the easiest one. But you look at changes in treatments, changes in drug. Drug regimens and then visits, right? So we're people are often just dancing around the healthcare system trying to figure out what to do, especially in specialty care. So once we do that, we can, we roll that up to really 15 categories that are sort of very much aligned with the top claims drivers of companies, right? Who are self-funded, everything, cancer, MSK, and all of our episodes roll up to those where we have an average savings per category, which we can compare against their claims data. So what's so cool about this is, we can we can basically sort of fashion an industry specific ROI, because a technology company with a younger professional, population might be different than a manufacturing company, just in terms of the different types of, health concerns that their population is dealing with. So we can do it industry specific. We'll be able to present our prospects and clients with, a utilization profile. How many of their members are using us? And then we can show them that, per episode, per condition, cost avoidance, which we think is, again, very honest and reliable, was, sort of credentialed or stamped by Milliman last year. So we feel pretty good about it. And again, in a very critical ROI environment, we feel like it's very defensible versus something that's a little bit more wishy-washy. So
thanks, Julian. Yeah. And kicking it back to David and Ray, like, Julian was talking through data, right? What role does data and data analytics play in creating and measuring that ROI? We'll start with you, David, and then we'll kick it over to Ray.
Yeah, I mean, what I think is that all this requires, as Ray was suggesting before, it requires excellent data, insights from the data to really get clarity about what your intervention is and metricize that as much as possible, and then also to build proxies of what the outcomes are that you're expecting. And Julian referenced that as well. It's not just that ultimate measure that you care about. It's what the sort of indicators along the pathway to success are. So I'll give you an example of this. If you're implementing a new care management program, you wouldn't just jump to the question of how many dollars does that save you. You would actually understand, are you engaging the population deeply? Are you getting the kinds of actions that you are expecting to result from the care management to happen? Do you have the metrics associated with that? And then are you seeing, for the people you're engaging with, a change in their utilization profiles of the healthcare system based on what you see as differences in the behaviors? So building that whole frame requires a lot of analytics capabilities and a lot of data sources that, frankly, sometimes are not very well curated in our environment.
Yeah, you're very right, David. The data landscape in healthcare today is so fractured and fragmented and of wildly varying quality that it's hard to put your thumb on something that really is highly useful. To Julian's point, being able to look both deep and wide is really crucial. And the only way that you can do that with any sort of validity is by having robust data to do that with, to be able to segment populations, to look at cohorting, to drive those things. It plays a fundamental role. To David's point, right, then the analytics, it's about the analysts and the decision makers understanding the process and the points of value that you're going to hit in order to build up those analytics in such a way that they're meaningful and believable, and that you've managed and mitigated uncertainty from where you're getting data to how that data is being manifest to how it's being analyzed and then decided upon. That really gets to the crux of driving ROI, right? And understanding assumptions, understanding risk and uncertainty, that gets you into a really nice, comfortable, defensible position on ROI. But at the end of the day, it has to do everything with knowing your process, knowing your product, and then having good data and good data science behind it to support all of the things that you're doing.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, David, for those thoughts. Yeah, it's taking it back to you, Julian. Too, I probably should have asked you this when you were diving more into the new methodology, right, around ROI. But what's the feedback been? What's the thoughts been from clients and investors on this methodology?
Yeah, I think it's been really positive. I think, traditionally, one could look at ROI as just, perhaps a number on a page that is defensible for a great program, and people didn't dig into it as much. I think there's a lot of pressure from CFOs right now on, hey, is this a real ROI, and how are you calibrating it, and how does it compare to the other solutions you have? And so, I would say that's point number one. And point number two is just this concept of like, honesty and reliability, right, is big, right? Because we are all sort of can know what numbers do. You can fashion numbers in a way that shows different outcomes. But if you truly come at it with integrity and also are forthright about the challenges and the data, and we've tried to find the best possible data partner in the market. We've tried to fashion it to our business model, which is important. And we're not just throwing up a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 or a 5-to-1 up there because people are just cynical on that, right? And so I think that's the client side. I'll tell you, on the investor side, there, that's one of the first questions. Like, okay, you're going to deliver an ROI for your product, because if you don't, like, you might as well just bring it home. I mean, at the end of the day, like when I make investment decisions, capital decisions in my company, I say, well, is this going to generate an ROI for Summus? Guess what? Investors think that way too, and guess what? Clients do too.
Thanks for that. You're 100% right. In terms of, and we can kind of, what I would like to do, we'll switch up the rotation here a little bit. We'll just continue on with you, Julian, and then we'll go Ray, and then last but not least, David. What are some advice do you all have for others in terms of measuring ROI for healthcare companies and organizations in their purchasing solutions? Like, what does that advice look like? And then we'll kind of do, I guess, a couple quick hitters from each of you here.
Yeah, I would just say, because we feel comfortable in our methodology and the intellectual rigor that we went at it, ask hard questions, because just dig in, ask hard questions. Nothing's going to be perfect. I'm sure David will say that too, but that would be my biggest advice. And then have a benchmark for what you want to get out of your program, and then hold them to it. Hold us to it, and we're ready to do that. So that'd be my point.
I'd make just two simple points. One, understand the problem that you're trying to solve and the impact that it's going to have, and then figure out how to believably measure that impact, and then back into what do I need to support that accordingly, as opposed to a lot of what we see, which is, hey, we've got a great solution, we're looking for a problem and have no idea how we're going to understand its impact or its value and how it delivers. Start with a problem, find a solution, know what that impact is, and then build into it. And at that point, no one can ever question the integrity of your ROI or the value that you're delivering.
Yeah, I'm right with you, Ray. I mean, I think what I always say is, let's build the plausibility case first. It's like, if you can't get your spreadsheet math to work on how this could potentially deliver the outcome, nobody's ever going to believe you. And doing that spreadsheet math around like X number of people impacted and X impact on each person and Y spread and all that stuff, then you if you do that well, you'll know what the levers are that you have to move to drive impact, and you'll be able to measure that, put the metrics around that build the case. Whether or not you got the broad outcomes, you've got the foundations of business case together that can make sense. But I will tell you, there are a lot of solutions out there that don't even do what I was just talking about, and they just don't hold water on the plausibility case.
And I think that's one of the interesting things when you look at some of the companies that have maybe failed over the last couple months, year, is they weren't able to show that ROI. There's some companies, right, that are in a forever funding cycle where they hope they can find that. And a lot of these health systems and even these other digital health companies, they need to, like, before they might be able to experiment or have a lengthier time, right, to show ROI. And that kind of got cut to some degree. So it's certainly been interesting to see how, how this plays out. I think, Julian, you mentioned earlier in the conversation, right, that, it's not that healthcare's recession proof, but it can resist, a lot of the pieces of recession that, other industries can't survive through. But gentlemen, I'm so glad that we were able to have the three of you on here to talk ROI in healthcare, and really enjoy the conversation. Hopefully we can have you come back on and we can dive into some other issues, but really appreciate having you all here.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jared.
Jared.